Good morning, Kumlena Black Gemara. We are up to Daf Mem, and very top of the page. So we're learning the laws of tzitzis, and we're just beginning here learning the law of tzitzis that tzitzis you could wear klein because the mitzvah of tchelis is a mitzvah of lavan. The lavan can be the material of the beged, or the lavan can be linen, and the tchelis, the blue, is always wool. So you're wearing klein. The tzitzis themselves are klein, or with the beged the klein, and so on. And now we're going to see it's not so straightforward. How do you know that you can wear klein by tzitzis? Because we learn in the Torah, Pashas Kisei, it says in one pasuk that you should not wear klein. Though wear wool and linen. And the next pasuk says dilim taselcha, put on tzitzis. So we darshan the smuchin, the juxtaposition. These two psukim will tell you that we say that asay of tzitzis pushes away the negative aveda of klein. And then we have what do you call it? We had a Rabbi Yehuda who does not believe in the concept of smuchin, but even Rabbi Yehuda, we said he's moide when it comes to Chumash Devarim, that in the Chumash Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu deliberately set it up in a way that we do darsha smuchin. So it would seem Pasha that everybody agrees that you wear tzitzis by klein, but not.
So anyone who says it's supposed together, it's saying that even tzitzis you shouldn't have.
That's Tesa's famous question. In Kedushin we had. And Tesa's answer here is when you have a choice between the two, we decided that it means that there is a mitzvah here. And from here you learn out the concept of Esadei Chaloisa Kolater Kula. But now we're going to have an opinion that actually doesn't agree with that, at least the way Rashi learned the Gemara. So tell about me learned. Sadin, if you, let's say, have a linen garment, b'tzitzis, and now you want to wear tzitzis, remember you're supposed to wear tchelis and love, and Beishamai poitin. Beishamai said you don't wear tzitzis. So how does Rashi learn the Gemara here? Rashi learns the Gemara here because Beishamai does not agree with smuchin. Even the Chumash Dvarim, which Tesis has a problem with, because the Gemara seems to say that everybody agrees in Chumash Dvarim, you do say smuchin. But Rashi learns is Beishamai holds you can never, ever be over an Avera, and maybe he doesn't even hold the whole concept of Chaloisasa, but definitely not by tzitzis. And therefore, it's klein, you're not allowed to wear. So then Rashi wonders why you use the word paitin. It should say it's asur, you're not allowed to put it on. He says paitin is because there's an opinion, we'll have the more later, there's a machlekes whether tzitzis is chayva on the person or chayva on the beged. If you have a four-cornered garment hanging on your wall, do you still have the mitzvah of putting there tzitzis? Beishamai would hold that there's a chayva on the beged, you have to put on tzitzis, but there's no klaim, let's say it's klaim, but klaim is only us if you're wearing it. So therefore Beishamai says you're exempt from putting on over here the tchelis because it's a question of a chayvus is not. And if you're exempt and you put it on, then obviously you'll be over the Isur Klein. Tesis does not like it at all because I just told you that everyone agrees you're allowed to wear Klein. But Tesis learns that he's saying Midrabbanon. We don't want you for the reasons the Gemara will soon tell us why Midrabbanon you don't want to. But let's continue more way Rashi learns. Shammai holds you cannot wear. Now, the difference would be, by the way, according to Shammai, you cannot wear wool, tchelis, on, let's say, a linen bag. So what do? You have all four of them to be made out of linen. All four tzitzis.
You're supposed to make the same species.
We learned that wool and linen, only exception, you can put them onto any beged you want. All other materials, we says, hakanov, min kanov. It has to be whatever the same material. Exactly. But on a silk beged, you could put wool, you could put linen. But here we're talking about a linen beged anyway, so you can have linen tzitzis on all four of them. The way Rabbi Tam learns that it's only midrabbanon that we don't want you to wear the tzitzis because we're scared, as we'll soon see where we have different concerns, then even linen tzitzis we don't want you to have. You putter completely. And that's why he says use the word putter. You don't have to wear tzitzis. Even in a case where there's no playim, just linen strings. We don't want you because we're scared that most people will also put on wool. You're going to put wool and it'll be klein. Anyway, Basil disagrees. He said chayiv. We have to wear tzitzis. And the halacha can give it a basil. The halacha is like basil. I don't understand. How? There's two ways we're shouting more now. How can you say that what the halacha is like basil? They don't allow you to wear a talis with talis. They don't allow you. In the halacha like basil, and basil holds that we say the asay of tzitzis pushes away the loises that he dashes the smuchin. Why mean not me? That's one we learn shot. Most of learn. But Rashi has another interesting shot that Rabbi Elazar argues with the Beishamai. You Beishamai said what? That it's usher because of Klein. Way Rashi learned, not way Rabbi Tam learns. But it's usher because of Klein. So why in Shleim they're only matmim? They should come out strongly and say it's wrong. Not matmim means what are you doing? It may be inappropriate. It's passing. According to it, they should come and answer it. So, Omar Rebbe said, Rebbe, let's go back to Rashi learns that the first round Rashi, that while we're going to Halacha Beisila, let you wear tzitzis and Klayim, Im Kain Lamasur, why talking Islam, they disallowed it or they discouraged people from wearing tchelis. Fishaim Bekiyin, they don't understand that only by tzitzis you're allowed to wear tchelis. They'll see people walking around with Klayim, they'll think, you're allowed to wear Klayim. You know what you should do? The Lir Mebeasara, take the 10 most distinguished rabbis in the city, the Nafka Lushuka, let them go where the tzitzis are hanging out, and everybody can see that they're wearing, climb in the tzitzis, and they realize there can't be something wrong here. Because these are tzaddikim, everyone knows climb is also shatnez, and here they see they have the shatnez laboratories, and here they see there's a bunny walking around, they realize, this is tzitzis. The Gemara said, no, forget, you will be the talk of town. That these rabbanim are all chleisos. Paskud mentioned they're walking around. They're terrible people. They're walking around with these climb. It's easier to gossip than to come up with an excuse to say they must be doing the right thing. Then the Gemara, okay, but leadership pirka, let them darshan the drushes. Now the Gemara doesn't answer who says they listen to the drusha, maybe they fall asleep. Obviously, in those days they used to listen to the drusha. So let darshan in yeshiva tell them you're allowed to. Think, okay, a new reason. You know why in Yerushalayim they didn't wear tchelis? They might wear because chilazon is very expensive. It was a rarity, right? Raised once every 70 years, so it was a rarity. So it's expensive. Kol ilan is it's indigo. It's a very similar color. It comes from the sapper tree, whatever. It's very similar color, and they'll cheat and they'll walk around with it. The problem is they will have wool. The problem is that it's not really what are called tchelis, and they'll be wearing klein. Then they're going to have woolen strings. Colored it, it's not chelis. They'll have it on a linen baguette. It'll be klein. So Lavan doesn't have to be white. It can be any color. Just it's not chelis, but it's wool. And the mitzvah is if you don't follow Rebbe, follow Chachamim, if you only have Lavan, you're also yaitz tzitzis. So who cares if it's klein? Okay, so he cheated. It's not really chelis. It's colorful white Lavan. So what? Wool, and it's klein, but you're allowed to. So Gemara says, no, kivan the efshe b'minan. We have a famous rule from the Shlokish all over Shas. That when do we say esa doicha asay doicha loiseh? When you have no breira, when you have no choice. So the esa doicha loiseh. But where you have, for example, you have a mitzvah chelis. It's a mitzvah. You have a linen baguette. You have no choice. You have to put on chelis. You have to have climb. So esa doicha loiseh. But if you have other things, if you have a choice that you don't need to wear, for example, on a woolen baguette. You need to have tchelis, but the other two strings, why make it linen? You don't need to make it linen. Make it all for wool. Then, in a place where you don't have to, you avoid it. So therefore, since this guy over here is not really tchelis, and you have a linen baguette, why do you have a colorful wool? You can't rely on this tchelis. That's why. That's the problem. Even the efshe b'minyan loy kedeshlokish damishlokish kom mojata moitza asay v'loisa im ati yoch lekayim shneim if you can do mut v'im lav yova asay v'yitches loisa. Basically, here in all the time asked, we just learned just yesterday that it's that chatchila you can that bein b'minan bein shalei b'minan you can mix wool and linen chatchila. And we don't say only when you have no choice. In other words, on a linen baguette, you have no choice because you have to have wool, tchelis. But on a woolen baguette, you have a choice. Make them all wool. Make tchelis and then luxury wool. But the Gemara yesterday said, "Bein b'minan shleibin that temer and pish and bein b'minan shleibin lechatchila." How do you reconcile these two Gemaras? Tases doesn't really give an answer. He sort of says maybe that's mahatayda and here we're talking about midrabanan. Maybe. But there's a stira and they tried to frame for the two Gemaras. And the Gemara continues. Okay. So we'll leave the coup. That's why you say you don't wear klein, because we're worried about the people cheat. You can and we're worried right now, there's two ways of learning. We're worried that the sellers will cheat. So the Gemara said we'll leave the coup. There's ways of checking it out. Either the seller should check it out or let the person buying it. We'll see in the Gemara in a few days from now. There's a system, there's a test you can do at home to see whether it's kol ilon or whether it's a real thing. So let them just check it out. We're worried that the person in the testing house will use a few strings to test to see whether the dye comes up right and everything else. And then he'll use those strings and sell it. Now, the problem is, even if it's it's not kol ilon, even if it's really chalazon, but because it was not done l'shma, we'll learn later it has to be done tviyah and everything has to be done l'shma. everything has to be done as well. Because it wasn't, you can make any test in the world you want, you'll never know. Like when you do a test film, that was the Mice of the Rebbe, where he said, see whether he wrote David's name was Shema or not. You can test in all computers, but you'll never know if it was written, with the right kavanas. So here also, we're worried that Taka is not Kol Elon, it's really Chilazon, but the person used it, the vendor used it to test, and then he sells it as normal good tzitzit strings. And therefore, and since you're not Yoitza, you're going to be wearing climb. And that's why the Chachmei Yerushalayim decide, we're not having climb here. But you might put out a zettel, the Rabbani should put out a thing and teach all the Moichrik Tchelis that, by the way, if you do a test, don't sell that string. So you make them all aware. So the Gemara, a diski lake of a thing, a letter works. You send some kind of letter, they ignore these things. Interesting. They ignore it. So what's the point of sending out letters? What do you call it? We're scared that they are going to ignore this letter. No, we're talking about if the people don't come to drushes, people who are not aware, so send them out a letter, send them out a telegram or something. Now this is an interesting question, I understand. Rav says, the Rabbanan send out a letter that this is make an Ibiyar, so therefore they push up Pesach. How do we know if you live far away from Shlayim? From a letter. Or about Yom Kippur when Rosh Hashanah is, how do they know? Because of a letter. So if a letter can help with things, if you eat Yom Kippur the wrong day, you be Chayv Kodesh, so you eat Chametz and Pesach Chayv Kodesh, and a letter is good enough. Surely a small, this is what I say about the Wutzitzis, when you make sure it's Lashma, make sure you don't use that. Surely they're gonna listen to the letter. Right? There is such a severe thing. They know that they take the letter seriously. They want to know. Yeah, they didn't really, they ignored it. And business is business.
Who's gonna know?
Exactly. Anyway, but that's the Gemara thinks that everybody's very frum, and Yoda Shemaim. Ella Marava Hamil Samri. This thing they said we eat Marava in Israel. Mushum de Rabbi Zayda Kavosi, and it said name Rabbi Zayda in my name. Tesa says here it says Rabbi Zayda, and our Gemara is Rabbi Zayda. So Rashi wants to learn other places that in that Bavel he was called Rabbi Zayda. When he moved, remember he fasted 100 days and he went to Israel. He became Rabbi Zayda. And Tesa learns must be two different people. Even though Rabbi Zayda himself ended up in Israel. And what's the shash is? Shema yikara sadine betergimu. What happens if your beged rips within 3 fingers of the corner? And you know that if you were where the tzitzis are supposed to be within 3 fingers of the corner. What happens if it rips? And you'll sew it up with a long string, and then you say, "Oh, I got strings here already." You let it hang. Now these 2 strings you're not yaitse with. You're not judged with it all because you didn't hang it lishma. You didn't do lishma for tzitzis. And the Torah says the Torah says that and then he'll add 2 more strings of tchelis, right? And then he'll add 2 more strings of tchelis, and suddenly now you have 4 strings. He should make a kosher, not start out in a way possible becomes kosher. Torah says I don't understand. What does that have to do with tasav v'loy? The first 2 don't become kosher when you added the 2 tchelis to it. The first 2 were done because you didn't do lishma. The problem is the way Rashi learns, you didn't do lishma. If you didn't do lishma, then the problem is it wasn't on lishma. And adding on 2 tchelis later doesn't in any way change what happened before. It's a different shot. But anyway, that's how Rashi learns. Shara Rabbi Zayda l'sadine. Rabbi Zayda once opened up his beged, his linen beged. And he took it off from there. When he heard all this, he decided, you know what? I'm taking off my woolen tzitzis because a gzeda of this gimel that maybe it'll rip and I'll do this thing. You know what? We shouldn't be wearing klein. People don't know this din. So he's saying that Zayda agrees with me that the chash is why in Shalim and why we don't wear klein tzitzis today because we're worried that the tzitzis might rip and then you'll sew it and the strings will become this and so on. Rav Zayda, see now this is Rav Zayda. That's what Tesa picks up. Rav Zayda Gzeda Nami Mishum Ksus Laila. Another reason altogether. We're worried about Ksus Laila. What do you mean Ksus Laila? Interesting. We have the same thing Rashi and Shabbos of Chafeda. But Rashi says here, this is one of the machlekes in which Shulchan says we don't know who the halach is like. Rashi says over here Ksus Laila. Rashi says So I just lost the place. Rashi says here, Shema yischaseboy belayla the potem tzitzis. At night you're potem tzitzis. Rashi doesn't make a difference whether the beged is a day beged, the beged is a night beged. It makes no difference. Night you're potem, day you're chayiv. And this is mamish mitzvah seishas man grama, because we learn out of Shimon will see later that he holds a mitzvah seishas man grama, women are potem, because at night you're always potem. The other day holds, like Rabbeinu Tam, no, that a ksus yoim, even by night you're chayiv, and a ksus laila, even by day, you are potter. That means according to Rabbeinu Tam, and why is it called mitzvah says man gramba? Because the fact that night has some bearing to it, because the day beged primarily you wore it during the day, and the night beged primarily you wear it at night. And according to Rabbeinu Tam, the Gemara has a discussion why we say pasha tzitzis at night, and it's so they didn't say pasha at night. According to Rabbeinu Tam, you chayv tzitzis ma'atoid at night if you happen to wear a day beged. Okay. So some of them say the reason why we tzitzis at night is not just because as a chumrah, it's because according to Rabbeinu Tam, you get to the mitzvah tzitzis ma'atoid. If it's a day beged, and you wear it at night as well. It's another din hamilsa. They said we time just like me. He shall beg it. What happens if the material of the garment itself is material? Stop. The conventional but the corners made out of leather. Now, by leather, there's no chiyuv tzitzis, but it's only the corners. The main thing is the beged. The beged says a big dehem. Even though it says conflict, but big dehem. So the main thing is the beged. So the chai. But if he shall, the beged is made out of leather, the confer shall beged, and just the corners where you place the tzitzis is made out of a garment. Potter. My timer, it can beged be. The main thing is the beged. But Choi says no. It says confer big dehem. The main emphasis is on the kanaf. What the material is the kanaf. What happens when you put on, there were only 3 corners to this beged, and then you kept on sewing, you made a 4th corner, but when there were 3 corners of the beged, you put them in tzitzis, and that's when you hung the tzitzis on the 3 corners. So at that time, when you made it, we just introduced the idea of tasav aleimina asu, and there's a whole chakira. What does tasav aleimina asu mean? Does tasav aleimina asu mean that you made it in a puzzle way? And then later on, you made it kosher automatically. That's no good. Or tasalim also means that when you make it, it should be done in a mitzvah way. If when you made it, it wasn't a puzzle way. It just wasn't yet a mitzvah. It's also tasalim also. But anyway, let's see. So here you made it. When you did the 3, there was no mitzvah of tzitzis. When did it become a mitzvah? When you added the 4th corner. But the tzitzis are already hanging there. So then it's tasalim also, and you're not jaitzah. Meir has a question. It says Hasidim of the Shoinin, they were so eager, very interesting, they were so eager to wear tzitzis. And that's what Tosha says there in the Shabbos, like a Pedic, that you have to bring yourself, like Moshe Rabbeinu said, so you have to bring yourself to want to do mitzvahs, like the mitzvah tzitzis. You have to put yourself in, because I'll tell you, you don't have to wear tzitzis. But there's a mitzvah to put yourself in a situation that you should be chayiv. Hasidim of the Shoinin, Kivan Sha'argu Bagimum. As soon as we learned by Tumah, the minimum size of a material is 3 fingers. As soon as they were going to weave a shirt, a beged, as soon as they started they wove 3 boys, is a metil chelis. They already hung tzitzis on it. There's only 1 corner here, and they already hung tzitzis. They couldn't wait. They wait, and they continued as it went on. They put on tzitzis. No, what happened? Tasso leimnasu. Amen. What says you misread. Kivan shepatzuba. As soon as they were about to finish, in other words, they already had 3 corners, and they were already up to within the 3 fingers of the last corner. So once you're within 3 fingers, like it's as if you finished already. Then they couldn't wait till they finished the last 3 fingers, and they did the other 3. There was already a chiv of tzitzis. Kimu shepatza bagimel, since they completed already, haymatin latchelis they put on. Today the Gemara you tell me it's tasav leimasu. But said hitil mutelas ksheda. What happens? You already have 4 strings hanging on your talis on your beged, but they're looking old and everything. You want to get fresh ones, so you decided for whatever reason you put the new ones on while the old ones are still hanging. Now when you put the new ones on, you didn't know there's no chiv of tzitzis then, so you did nothing. He did nothing. And then you cut the old ones, so l'chayda that's tasav alayim and asri, right? Automatically, the new ones now became the chiv because you don't have any more of the old tzitzis. And the din is a kosher. It says right here, hita limuted ksheda. What happened to tasav alayim and asri?
You put them on. There was no requirement.
Exactly. So there was nothing there. Omar Rabba. So Rabba says an interesting thing. Rabba says now l'chayda in this case here, when you put it on, it wasn't possible in any way. You just
There was no inyan for it, so it wasn't done in a kosher way. But it wasn't. You didn't do it in a apostle way. So says Rava, you know what? It has to be about Tosef Koi. When you were doing it, when you put the extra fork, you're actually over an aveda of Baal Tosef. And and as Rashi explained, if you're over an aveda, it's like you did nothing. And therefore, Ma'isa Lahava, you put on strings, it never happened. It's like it doesn't non-existent. Interesting sort of that if that you did it, it's like it never happened. Yet we had by Truma, we said, what's the raya that if you did Truma Tameya and Truma Kosher, that you did Truma, but you did the wrong thing, because otherwise, what's the Aveda? Nothing happened. And here you're saying that you're over Baal Tosef, but nothing happened. The only way you're over Baal Tosef is something did happen. Then you're over Baal Tosef. So Rashi says, since you're over an Aveda Torah, Heshnish Kemaisa. You might be over, but it's not called a Maisa. Even the over Divri Torah loy mikra Maisa. Not called as if you did an activity. So when you tore the first ones, it's as if you did a Maisa right now. And that's in Svara is hard to understand, as Taisa so points out on the answer. In Sukkah, we had that if you put schach that was mechuba to a tree on the Sukkah, and then afterwards you cut off the trees, tasav alei menasi. You just did a maisa, but since you already put it on the tree, the maisa you're doing is sort of outside of the branches. Here, the maisa you're doing is on the other strings, not on the strings you originally hung up. The strings you originally hung up, Yitil al Mutelis, was nothing happened because it's Baal Tosef. Then after, what are you cutting? You're cutting off the other strings, and you tell me that's considered as a maisa. What's the difference? Yeah, so the Papa argues. He says, you decided that he added another pair of tzitzis, about taste, nothing happened. Maybe forget. Maybe his kavana was, these are good, nice strings. Those are dirty, yucky. I don't want it to be kosher anymore. So he's not doing it to be Baal Tosef, he's doing it to cancel the first ones. And you're not over Baal Tosef unless either you have kavana, according to some, or even if you have no kavana, you're over Baal Tosef. But here's like a kavana havchis. I'm talking about my pop, mask pop, and my digav, like sufik and how he's trying to add another layer of mitzvah, and then you tell him, oh, Baal Tosef, that he knows he wants the original to exist, and he's adding another layer. He wants to be more machber. He thinks he has whatever. Maybe what he wants is that this should take the place of the first one. The first should no longer function. Batayseleka, a maisika. So then there's no Bataysev, and there's a maisa. So it's tasav. What's going on here? Why is it that? He's arguing this with Rabbi Swara. As we said before, Tchelis is no climb. Even a talus which is potted, if you put on the Tchelis, you're not chayv. And the Gemara wants to know quickly, what do you mean a talus that's potted? My talus, a talus that's potted, if you put on wool and linen, there's no climb. A talus needs a certain shear. We say number by number. What's the shear? The shear of a Tanya, we learn. The talus, the shiva talus is that it has to wrap around the cotton. Talus, cotton is chasa by roisha v'rubai. It has to be a beged. What's the definition of a beged? That a child can wrap around in it, and a godel yezecharek, that a godel won't wear on a permanent basis because obviously it's small in him, but from time to time he's not embarrassed to wear something that's so small. Then it's considered a beged, and hayeves betzitzis. It's chay betzitzis. But ain't a cotton is chasa by roisha v'rubai if it's so small. The beged, then even though godel from time to time might walk around with it, doesn't help. It does not consider beged. So we say it's an amanama. That's why some people wear a bendel so that they should stay an amma by nama open up. Now, then it says, and the same thing it says in the Braisa applies to climb. What do you mean the same thing? What do you mean by that? What do you mean that my mechina climb? Elay mechina should climb. Tell me what climb also if it's too small of a beggar, it's not climb. But now we learned ein adai climb. That we don't care if a normal person wears it or not. If you wear it as a beggar, it's climb. If there's climb in there. So what do you mean the same thing as the way we just said by tzitzis where it depends on the size and a cotton can wrap around, a godel would wear it out. The same thing applies to climb. What does that mean? Ella my ptura. It says, sorry, we skipped. The same thing applies to if you have a linen beged when it comes to tzitzis. So you're wearing klein. No, so what do you mean? If the talus is potted and you wear tzitzis of wool, it's all right. What do you mean? When the talus is potted, and still, even though there's a potted talus, you're not going to be able to climb. What's a potted talus? It must be talking about hitil metellus. It's talking about Hitil Metellus, which means there was already tzitzis hanging, and you added another layer of tzitzis, and it's climb. You still and the chayr is potter because the second layer is nothing. You're still potter. In other words, because once you matter climb by tzitzis, you can matter completely. So if you put 4 additional tzitzis on the beged, even though right now it's not really adding anything because you already have 4 tzitzis hanging. Once the tater was matter climb, that shot. That's like every time we need the assay to be pushed away. Because then, no, it's like the Tater says, I'm removing the Isser of Klayim from tzitzis. I'm removing completely. So even though these extra strings hanging, you don't really need for your tzitzis.
Put the extra, we
just said it before. So the Papa says, no, you want to cancel. But the Poil, you didn't cancel it because it's still hanging there. But that's what your intention is. So you have no intention about Taisif. If that's what he's trying to tell you here, that if you put it on, it's still tzitzis. No, what he's saying here is that it's tzitzis b'shas ma'isa, and that's why it's not a problem of tasav v'loy mina asu in this case here, because it's as if you did not do a ma'isa which is possible. You didn't do a ma'isa which is possible, just it's not yet kosher because you haven't yet canceled the first row strings. But you didn't do a ma'isa of puzzle. So in other words, what's the isur of tasav v'loy? Is the word tasav also that you have to do it in a puzzle, and then later on you fix it up? Or even if you didn't do an eifon of puzzle, just you didn't do an eifon of kosher. When you hung up the second 4 strings, even though it's not puzzle, but it's not yet kosher, you don't need it. That's the machlekes Rav Papa. That's the machlekes Rav Papa in a way. So that's what we're saying now. Rav Zayd is saying here that it's not climb because it's not possible. He didn't finish yet. That's what he's trying to tell you. We just said before. Rav Zayd said that hitul mutel is ksheda. He didn't say both in him. He only told us one din. He just told us hitul mutel ksheda. And once you tell me that the second pair of tzitzis is kosher, even though right now you don't yet need it yet, is so therefore there's no climb here whatsoever. Right now there's no climb here because if you rip the second one, the first one definitely is always kosher. Even if you rip the first one, the second one only becomes kosher afterwards. It was never possible in the first place, as if there's always a potential of being kosher, and there's no climb. So continue, Amir.